morning and welcome to Thought for the Day. It's probably not too difficult to guess where I'm coming from today. It's nice just to be outside, see some of the fogginess of the weather just behind me. But I've been thinking what to say today, and in fact, first of all, I need to say sorry that I haven't been online for the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago I had a bit of a technical issue with signal strength on the mobile, so it wouldn't quite go out, and then last week was more of a timing issue, and I didn't quite get there and get my morning organised enough for Thought for the Day, so we're back now anyway. But in thinking about today, I was reflecting about sort of 3 weeks ago. In fact, let me wander on. About 3 weeks ago, I was in an age concern shop in Devon, and in that shop I said to the lady behind the counter I would like some knitting needles because I'd seen a box of them on the side, and she said to me, "Oh, well, what size?" I said, "I have no idea." So, "Well, what pattern?" I said, "Well, there is no pattern. I'm just trying to make a 9-inch square of wool." And they said, "Well, just go and pick up some wool from a big pile they had in the shop, and we'll work out what you need with that." So I ended up with a pair of good sized needles. And then for the first time in a long time, I set about learning to knit. Not at my mother's knee, as of past years, but via that amazing source of information, sometimes YouTube. And so I sat, worked out, started, stopped, worked out it's a lot more difficult than I remember, that you could get the wool too tight, you can get the wool too loose, you can do all sorts of things. But eventually I managed to knit a little bit. And then, having done that, worked out what that meant in terms of stitches and rows to create a 9-inch square and started. I seem to have an ability to sew holes into things, which I'm sure will be useful one day, but it'd be quite nice not to on every 9-inch square that I try. But this whole thing of knitting, where you take that single strand of wool and gradually, through the complexity of a relatively simple movement of knitting needles, you create something, you weave something together. Got me thinking just about life, and actually sort of turn my heart to what the psalmist says in Psalm 139, where he reminds himself before God. He says, "God, you knit me together in my mother's womb." That drawing together of the fabric of life, yes, in the womb to be born, but then I think that sense of knitting perhaps continues through our lives, through each and every day. Knitting can take different levels of effort for different people, and I remember from the past, I'm sure there are many knitters around who've done things like the beautiful flowers that we saw out on the Lichgate at All Saints and in other places, remembrance. But there are people who can knit with ease, naturally, easily. Their fingers have the memory of what they're doing, and so it requires little conscious thought, and in that perhaps knitting can become something of contemplation. Then there are those much more like me, for which every stitch is a matter of thought, a matter of care. Every once in a while one might get dropped, and that's probably the source of the holes in my knitting. But it is still a creative process. It still draws that single strand of wool into something of volume, of substance. As we go through life, perhaps we could think that each day is just a continuation of the strand of yarn that is our life, that started knit together in the womb and continues through and goes on into eternity. And as we knit our lives each day by our actions, by our relationships, by our interactions, perhaps sometimes, yes, we do drop a stitch and it doesn't go quite as well, or something comes that disrupts our pattern. Perhaps there are days when it just flows smoothly and we get what feels like the tidiest of knitting in our lives. But in all of this, actually it's not our hands perhaps that do the knitting. Perhaps our lives are knitted by hands much greater and more loving than our own. So perhaps you go through today, through this week, to be conscious that actually the best way maybe is not to try and take control of the needles from the perspective of the wool, but just to allow the fabric of what we are to be woven by expert hands, and in that just to be shaped, to be formed, and to be loved. I pray your week isn't too full of drop stitches, and I hope mine isn't either, both in the real term of the knitting I'm doing, knitting a 9-inch square to give to Liz in our congregation, where we're putting together blankets to give away to those who will need them as the weather turns colder. If you do knit, please 9-inch squares, that's what we're after, or 18-inch squares. And if you don't know where to put them in terms of the church, where you could drop them into All Saints or in the porch at St James, or even into the vicarage. But in terms of life, as things are woven together this week, just remember the loving hands that are doing the weaving around. God bless. Just have a warm and loved week. Bless you, and bye for now.